When I was a kid, I used to love playing sports in the backyard by myself. I didn't love playing by myself, but that's just kind of how it worked out. But anyway, I would love to play basketball. And whenever I played basketball, inevitably I would start a countdown towards a buzzer beater where I have a chance to win the big game. It went a little something like this. James has the ball. He shakes left. He moves right. He finds an opening. 5, 4, 3, 2. He shoots. He scores! David has knocked off Goliath. Except that's not really how that story goes. Stick around. We'll talk about it. We're here to study the Bible. We're here to study the Bible. We're here to study the Bible. Might get us in trouble, 'cause we're being intentionally provocative with our intros. The story of David and Goliath is easily one of the most well-known stories in the entire Old Testament, if not in the entire Bible. It's well known in our culture, perhaps due to its usage as a description of a lopsided matchup in modern competition, whether it's sports or politics. If there's ever an underdog who, from the looks of things, stands zero chance whatsoever of winning, we refer to it as a David and Goliath story. For others, David and Goliath is a meaningful part of your childhood. Maybe beyond that, it was a meaningful part of your spiritual upbringing and formation. You might have fond memories of your Sunday school days, learning about David, that brash young little shepherd boy with 5 smooth stones and a slingshot and an unshakable faith in the Lord. When everyone else was scared to move in Israel, David shirks the armor of the king and, approaching the giant Goliath, secures victory for all of Israel. Now, I want you to hold on to those memories, to that nostalgia, because it's important for your story. Honestly, it's important for my story too, but I'm gonna push back just a touch, just a skosh. I'm gonna push back on the likelihood that this way of framing the story is what actually happened historically. I'm gonna push back just a touch, and I'm not doing that out of spite. I'm not doing it because I want to destroy those memories for you. I'm doing it because I'd like to propose a different way, maybe a better way, at least a more ancient way to read this story. And there's a lot going on in 1 Samuel 17 in the story of David and Goliath. In this video, I want to talk about the military perspective in this particular account. And from that perspective, David is not playing according to the rules. In 1 Samuel, we learn pretty quickly that Goliath is large and in charge. There are some differences of opinion on how large he is. The Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, it has Goliath standing at 6.5 feet tall. And actually there's some Hebrew manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls community that we have that also places Goliath at about 6.5 feet tall. Side note, biblical scholars love to quip right here that if Goliath was really 6.5 feet tall, then he stands no larger than a modern day shooting guard in the NBA. And I'm convinced that the only reason why they put that in their books is to try to convince us that they watch sports when we know. We know. Now, in the Masoretic text, which is the version of the Hebrew Bible that we use, that most scholars use, it's actually the latest version. Some of the other ones, the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, they predate the Masoretic text. But in the Masoretic text, Goliath stands at 9.5 feet tall. That's probably how tall you know him to be. All of this is based on scholars' best understanding of how large a cubit is, which is basically the distance between your wrist and your elbow, which is also the same size as your foot. I've never fact-checked that, but I heard it in middle school and we're gonna roll with it. It's about 18 inches or so. Now, apparently there's another way that you can understand the length of a cubit. It's a long cubit, according to Frank Moore Cross. And that would put Goliath at about 8 feet tall. Baruch Halpern, who's a Jewish scholar, says either way we understand this. During the transmission of the Masoretic text, which is that last Hebrew text that we have, Goliath enjoyed a growth spurt, moving from 6.5 feet to 9.5 feet. You can just tuck that one away. Goliath is also outfitted in a lot of armor. Halpern, again, is helpful in helping us to understand what this might look like. He summarizes the scene in this way. Goliath wore a helmet and a cuirass of bronze plates, weighing more than 110 pounds. Cuirass, that's a beautiful word. You know that guy's not watching the NBA, right? You don't use words like that and watch the NBA. Anyway, okay. All of this, the helmet and the cuirass of bronze plates, it weighs more than 110 pounds. He wore greaves to protect his legs, and a bronze sword was strapped across his back. This is a scimitar. It's a curved bronze sword. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, according to the Bible. And Halpern would say that last phrase, like a weaver's beam, it doesn't refer to the weight of the spear, but more to the rope that's wrapped around the butt of the spear to serve as a handle. People disagree on this. Either way, the spear that Goliath carried, according to Halpern, was a thrusting weapon, not a ballistic one. You're not going to throw this one because it's got a tip that's 15 pounds. When I was in middle school, we had a shot put one time, and instead of doing a real shot put, I tried to throw it like a baseball. I think I tore my rotator cuff at that point. Two things to note from this description of Goliath's armor. One, according to another Old Testament scholar, Stephen McKenzie, he would say there was never a soldier equipped like Goliath. No, I mean really, there was never a soldier equipped like Goliath. He continues, his outfit is drawn from the writer's knowledge of different kinds of weaponry in the writer's day. So what we have in our biblical story of David and Goliath is an image of Goliath in 1000-ish BC, outfitted in armor from later eras. It's anachronistic. It's like Abraham Lincoln with a cell phone. It's stuff that doesn't happen. And also, Goliath is wearing armor that doesn't match the depiction of Philistine warriors of the time, according to iconographic evidence, like pictures in Egyptian reliefs that depict the Philistines, and they're not outfitted in armor like this. That's the first thing that we need to note. Goliath is like a soldier that was never equipped like this before. Point number two, Goliath was clearly outfitted for hand-to-hand combat, which piques the interest of some ancient interpreters. One noted the biblical language of Goliath in the story sort of lumbering around, struggling to get near David for what seems to be like an eternity. For example, in verse 41, it says, David has a stick in his hand. That'll be important in a moment. David has a stick in his hand and a slingshot in the other hand, and he came forward toward the Philistine. Quote, and the Philistine was drawing near to David. In verse 42, Goliath looks and sees David and despises him. He's still at a distance. In verse 43, Goliath says, am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks? There's still this distance that needs to be traversed. Also note, David had stick, singular. In verse 43, Goliath says, am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks? Plural. Now, some people go crazy with this little difference in the text. They would say that the reason why Goliath was so big is because he has a tumor in his pituitary gland, which makes him not only be super tall, it also affects his vision, so he sees double. So David doesn't have one stick, he has two sticks. Isn't it fun? It's just fun. In verse 44, Goliath says, come to me that I may give your flesh to the birds. And for the ancient interpreter, all of this drawing near and coming near, it seems to beg the question, what's taking Goliath so long to get to David? And the answer is equally clear. He's outfitted for a different type of warfare than what David was about to engage in. We have this understanding of David's trust in God, that he, as the underdog, will be able to survive the fight because of his piety, because of his trust, because a miracle is about to happen, which launches into pastors saying, so what's your miracle? What's your giant? And this is the reading of the story. David has no chance of beating Goliath, but he trusts and he has faith. What are you trusting in? That sort of thing is happening here. But David's not playing according to the rules. Goliath is armed as a heavy infantry man, and he's ready for hand-to-hand combat. Don't you love how graceful that was? Heavy infantry man. He's ready for hand-to-hand combat. He's ready to grapple. He's ready to jump on somebody's back and choke him out with a rear naked chokehold, like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is what Goliath is ready to do, whereas David is a light infantry man. He's a projectile warrior. He's the guy with the javelin that you throw, or the slingshot. A slingshot is not a kid's toy in the ancient world. It's an implement of war that is utilized by very skilled marksmen. So David just rolls up there and snipes Goliath right in the face with his slingshot, and then chops off his head. The miracle on ice is aptly named. It's a miracle. David Tyree's catch in Super Bowl 42, it was a miracle. That guy had stickum on top of his head. That should not have happened. I would feel sorry for some of my viewers right now who are Patriots fans, but I just don't. Okay, I just don't. The Mississippi State Bulldog buzzer beater against UConn, snapping their 111-game winning streak, which I think would have been their 4th national championship in a row. Check me on that. In the 2017 NCAA Women's National Basketball Championship game, that was a miracle. That should not have happened. But David beating Goliath, that was a mismatch. So let's go back to Sunday school for a second. Your teacher wasn't wrong. In the story, David trusts in God. That's the depiction that we get. Your teacher wasn't wrong. In the story, no one else in Israel was defending the name of the Lord, least of all Saul. Remember, he's tall. He's supposed to be the guy, but he wasn't doing it. Your teacher wasn't wrong. This is an important moment for us to see some of the character of David. And clearly, the author of 1 Samuel wants us to view David through the lens of this particular story. But historically speaking, your teacher might have been wrong that little David never stood a chance. Because if you're wearing hundreds of pounds of armor, and if you're looking to put somebody in a rear naked choke, then don't mess with a dude with a sling. In the next video, we're going to unpack this story even more. And again, I would encourage you, don't invite your Sunday school teacher to watch, because this one might hurt even more.